In the last video, we put something in state and talked about rendering. In this video, we're going to talk about rendering arrays of things. Last time it was just single values. One thing was a number, one thing was a string. In this case, we're going to talk about arrays. And we're going to talk about how to render an array of numbers and then strings, and that'll actually be the same. And then an array of objects, which, is the same in many ways, but a little different. Because if you've done looping through objects, then you're going to deal with dot notation and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's what we're going to discuss today. Arrays in state and how to render them in React. I have a brand new application here. I'm going to open up the app. Here we go. This is just freshly created out of Create React App. And here it is with our default UI. Let's get rid of the default UI. There it is, gone. So I want to put a list of numbers here. And I'm going to put a list of strings. And then a list of objects. Now, this component is going to have state. Our three arrays of numbers, strings, and objects are going to be in state. So that means I'm going to start with default state, which we discussed last time. So I'm going to create a constructor. I'm going to immediately call super, because we have to call that, because this calls the constructor of component. Then I'm going to set up my default state. So there's an array of numbers, there's an array of strings. Let's have a simple array of people. These people will have a first name, a last name. You can see where I'm going with this, getting ahead of myself, and an age. So here we go, an array of numbers, an array of strings, an array of people. Assuming we have no syntax errors, we'll see here what we've rendered below, which is this, just the three H2s. How would we take this data and put it down here? Well, what we can't do is we don't want to do this. So anything we put in the state, we can reference down here. We don't really want to do this. This right here kind of works. It just puts the numbers in. This doesn't work at all. Actually, it's very angry at us. The numbers it can handle, but if you've got objects here, it's going to give you this error. And so if you ever see this error, here's your clue on how to fix it. Objects are not valid as a React child, meaning you can't just stick an object into the JSX there in the render. You can't just put a whole object. You can put individual properties, but you can't just put a whole object. If you meant to render a collection of children, use an array instead, or wrap the object using create fragment. We're not going to do either of those things. I'm going to show you what we're going to do. And so we'll get there in a second. All right, and so this is not what we want, where we want to go with numbers, even though that does work, or with objects, or with anything. What we want to do is we want to create a bit of HTML for each thing in the array. That's going to be the normal way of handling this. And what I mean in this case, let's just say I wanted to create a series of divs. And this series of divs is going to, each one is going to have a number in it. So how would I do that? Well, the typical way of doing this in React is to just use map. Map is a function, if you haven't used it, a map is a function that is built onto arrays in modern JavaScript. And so we can say this.state.numbers.map. And what this will do is this will essentially iterate over the array for us. And the map function, the purpose of the map function is it is a transformation function. It doesn't change what is in the array, but what you do is you basically call the map function to take each value out of the array and create a transformed version of it. That's the idea. It really ultimately copies it and transforms at the same time. So in this case, I want to map, and whenever I map, this is a function, you pass a function in. And the most common argument is the first, where this is the item. So in this case, we've got a number. And so the number here, is going to be each number one at a time in the array. And so if I were, for example, to do this, I would be returning a div with the number in it for every number in the array. So I would get a div with a 1, a div with a 2, a div with a 3, a div with a 4, and a div with a 5. And if we look here in the page, we will in fact see that. So here is divs for each one of these. And so when I said it loops through, it's basically looping through each thing in the array, and whatever you return here, it will create a new array with this value in it, once for each thing in the array. And so I have 5 numbers in the array. That means it's going to return, meaning map is going to return a new array with 5 things in it, because 5 things go in, 5 things come out. And each item is going to be a div with, in this case, the number just nestled snugly inside of it. And so here we go, we have a map of numbers. And so we've mapped, or we've converted all the raw numbers into an array of divs with those numbers in them. Let's do the strings. This is going to be very similar. I'm going to go here and I'm going to say this.state.strings.map. And unlike the first one, I'm going to use a single line arrow function. If you do have a single line arrow function, you don't have to have, for example, return keyword. You can make it a little bit more terse. So I'm going to do that here. So let's see. This is a string. So I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to return a div, and then I'm going to put this string inside of it. Here we go. Pants, pin, backpack, and book. Now, some things to note before we move on. Let's open up the Chrome DevTools. We will see a warning. Well, first of all, we see this logo warning, which actually isn't very important. This is just from earlier when I deleted all the content. Now here is the actual warning I want to focus on. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. And so that's referring to, down here, I have created a bunch of divs. And what React wants you to do is create a key property. This is to help React manage the DOM elements you're creating, essentially. This is something for it, not necessarily for you. And so that's fairly easy. If all the items in an array are unique, then you can actually just use that item. So in this case, all the numbers are unique here, so we can just use it. And so that will get rid of the warning for that one. But I have 2 arrays, and so I still have a warning. And so what am I going to do here? Well, I'm going to do something a little different. I mentioned earlier that the most common argument you're going to use with map is this first one, and that's each item in the array one at a time, essentially. There's a second argument which is very useful, and that is index. If you want, you can actually just use the index value, and so this would be similar if you were to write the for loop yourself. Imagine a for loop with a var I equals 0, and you're walking through the loop and incrementing that each time. That is this value that it is generating for you. And so you can say key equals index. And so now we have our list of numbers and our list of strings, and everything looks good. So what about those objects? We already saw that we can't just put this .state .people in there. That didn't work. That made React rather angry. What we need to do is we need to turn these objects into essentially DOM elements. And so I am going to create an unordered list here. And so if you wanted to create an unordered list, you're going to put the unordered list tags before and after your map. And that's the reason why is because whenever you're mapping, you're essentially creating those items inside or in place of wherever those mustaches are right there. And so you're going to create them at that point, which means if you want to create list items, which I'm going to do, well, you want those inside a list. And so I want the list start before and the list end after. So here we go. I can say this .state .people .map person. Let's go multi-line. All right, I want to return a list item, and let's put in the person dot first name. And so this is why I wanted to show an example of objects, because when you're mapping through and you're creating DOM elements, you can't just use this value like we did up here with string and number. You're going to have to use dot notation to get to the property you want to use. So in this case, first name, space, last name, age, see how well that works. So we have that same warning that we had before. But you can see it does at least work right here. Now let's go get rid of that warning. So we could use the index, we could use any unique value. And that means we can actually generate that value if we want to. Like for example, in this case, we could use, let's say, the index if we want. Let's say index. Let's take this out here. That works just fine. If you want to, you could try to generate that from code by doing something like this. Now here we go. In this case, it doesn't really matter. The point is here, whatever this is, it needs to be unique for all the items within that list. Now, two other things I want to talk about before we leave this topic and stop this video. First of all, if what you're doing here is a complicated bit of HTML, what you can do is you can actually move all of this outside of this return and move it up a little bit. This is a fairly common thing to do. And part of that will depend on how big this HTML blob comes. Let me show you how that would work. So if we want to, we can take this, actually let's take all this chunk that's in between those two mustaches, those two curly braces, as they are properly but boringly called. And so here is that map. So a map function returns an array of things. And so I'm going to say const people items. So this right here is a list, is that list of list items, this array of list items right here. I can take that down here and plug it in right there if I want. And everything continues to work exactly as it did. This is just an organizing feature. That's essentially what this is. It's just a way of organizing. If you find it easier just to include it, like in this particular case, we got one line. This is really easy to just stick in there. That's totally cool. But if you want to bring things out because it's huge, or just because that's how you like organizing things, you can totally do that. It's cool. Now, let's see. I actually don't like that first name there. I'm going to remove that. Okay. The next thing I want to show you is this error. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. All right, well, we've seen this error before. It's the same error you get if you try to return two sibling elements from a React component, like if we put another div right down here. Okay. Same thing with maps. Whenever you map, what you have to do is you have to return one element. You can, if you want to, return any other number of elements inside of it. It's totally cool to do this, for example. All right, you can put other elements in it, but you need to make sure, and there it is, you need to make sure you only return one element as the parent, and everything else can be nested inside it. Those are the keys there. Okay, so in this video, we've set up some arrays in state, array of numbers and strings, and then an array of objects. And I showed you how to map through them, how you can essentially use the map function to create an array of elements for the page. And React will take that, just stick it in the page wherever you put it. We talked about keys, and those are these key properties that must go here whenever you do a map like this. And so we've got, we talked about keys, and we talked about dot notation in mapping objects. You got to remember that whenever you're mapping an array of objects, that this is an object, not just a single value, and you'll need to use dot notation to get to the actual properties that you want to use in the output of the HTML. All right, so that's what we covered in this video. Good luck. React is awesome. You can do it.